Високоповажний пане посол, вельмишановні.
Dear Mr. Ambassador, dear guests, representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and of embassies, dear colleagues and friends, I am glad to greet you at our today's presentation. The presentation is prepared by the Institute of Foreign Policy. This project is an annual project. It is the main project in the world policy. We present the second discussion note. The previous notes have already been presented for the affairs between Ukraine and Hungary, Ukraine and Germany, Ukraine and USA. Today we will be talking, to my mind, about key relations and important relations between Ukraine and Belarus, which is the neighbor of Ukraine. I'm glad that we can do it along with Mr. Valentin Velichko, extraordinary and plenipotentiary ambassador of Belarus to Ukraine. And Mr. Roman Besmertny, extraordinary and plenipotentiary ambassador of Ukraine to Belarus in 2010-2011, and Yevgen Pregerman, a well-known expert on foreign policy issues, director of Expert Initiative Minsk Dialogue. Yevgen came from Minsk to us, and activities of Mr. Pregerman are connected to seeking dialogue on Minsk agreements on the expert level, and creating additional expert Minsk dialogue where the experts gather 2 years in a sequence to generate agenda to develop Ukraine-Belarus relationship. And Andrei Skiba, he is also an expert in Ukraine and Belarus relations and research fellow at the Research Center Institute on Privatization and Management from Minsk, Belarus. Our sponsors are Pact Belarus, financed by USAID. I'm glad that we have support from international financial institutions and other international organizations. And I'm thankful to the Institute of World Policy for their work in preparing the presentation and this event. My name is Elena Bitli. I'm an analyst in the Institute of the World Policy and the co-author of the text which we present today. Today, I'm also a moderator and a speaker. So first I would like to make several remarks about the text which we present. It would be from the point of view of Kiev, how we see our bilateral cooperation. Those of us who knows well the format of discussion notes in the foreign policy, they can for those who doesn't know this format, I will say that this is an analysis of relationship, and here we took account of the context of cooperation from March 2014. Previous analysis findings are very well known. We, of course, used it Minsk structure is very well established. The second section is specifics of relations today. The third section is dedicated to interests of both sides. We analyze sectoral cooperation, military defense, and regional cooperation and cooperation between individuals. Also, we analyze risks and provide our recommendations. And in a separate section, we tried to analyze main interests and how to orient, how Ukraine can orient in interest groups in Belarus. The notes are mostly oriented to Ukrainian readers. That is why we outlined interest groups in Belarus. So several theses about the general background, general summary of this note. This first is a background and context talking about the Ukrainian and Belarusian relations. We would like to remind about Zhizhnevsky and participation of Belarusian citizens in the events in Ukraine, both in Kiev and in the east of the country. On the one hand, we are talking about participation of Belarus in Ukrainian events and Ukrainians' participation in the events in Belarus. This context influences the relationship. The other context is the war in the east of the country. We can outline this like continuous warfare, and Belarus citizens, they are taking part in those military hostilities in the east, on the both sides. Some Belarusians took part in separatist military formations. This is one more aspect which is interpersonal. It raises the safety issues, security issues. It is the main one for Ukraine, and we hope that Belarus will proceed to remain neutral side in this conflict and will facilitate Ukraine in the framework of many agreements on military and technological cooperation. Today you saw one of the news which was in mass media about 28th Motor Brigade, which is transferred in Russia, closer to the border with Belarus. So this is for President Lukashenko not to make some pro-European statements which have been issued recently, talking about regional cooperation, development of relationship between Belarus and European Union countries and USA and Belarus. We can see some signals of possibilities of exchange with ambassadors. Our recommendations are about this. Why the context is more of economic nature, of global nature, which is about the new Silk Way. We can talk about some kind of competition between Belarus and Ukraine for participation in this project. On the other hand, we should not forget about about joint Belarus, Lithuania, Ukraine transportation of weights of cargoes to Ilichivsk and Klaipeda. So relations differ. We have conflict zones, we have risk zones, which are also identified in our note, but we have many common things. They are, first of all, interpersonal context and closeness of our citizens, and the fact that according to March pollings and other surveys by the Center of Independent Surveys, most of Belarusians look at on the events in Ukraine from the position of Russian Federation. 75% of Belarusians think that Ukraine experiences civil war, but we would like to have not only the power, the regime of Belarus on the side of Ukraine, but also its people, its population. For this, to this end, we need to make efforts to turn Belarusians to our side. Thank you.
Languages, then I'll switch into English. Well, thank you. It's greatest pleasure to be here, and it's tremendous honor to have been part of this project. And thanks a lot for the Institute of World Policy for inviting me. Given the time restraints, let me focus on a couple of things now. First of all, probably a couple of observations, maybe a bit abstract observations, which I think have important implications for our bilateral relations. And then I'll briefly look at two specific things, namely security and trade. I think one of the problems which is always or often overlooked in Belarus-Ukraine relations is that this whole relationship is completely overloaded with cliches. And cliched perceptions dominate the media, they even dominate expert discussions both in Belarus and, from what I understand, in Ukraine. And these cliched understandings usually carry sort of normative implications. Whenever people hear about Belarus-Ukraine relations, they usually tend to talk or have thoughts in this normative realm, which are about black and white, good and bad, and so on. And to make matters even worse, usually these cliche discussions are part of other narratives. Again, if you look at the discussions that we usually have, they are part of this bigger narrative of Russia, the West relationship, and then you normally find very little about pragmatic bilateral relationship as such. And in this respect, it's interesting that if you look at the governmental level, government-to-government relations, they are quite different. This is where the pragmatism and sort of realist understanding of interest is centered. And in this respect, especially from the point of view of Belarus, I think this is a very important point of concern to be addressed. Like Alena already mentioned, if you look at public opinion surveys in Belarus, then the majority of the Belarusians would hold opinions about the situation inside Ukraine, about the war in Donbass, about Crimea, which are mainly similar to what you usually hear from Russian TV channels. And this is an important area to address and to somehow bridge this gap between the governmental understanding of real interest and national interest of the two countries and the discussions that are prevalent in our societies. Therefore, I think there is an urgent need to start developing our own narratives. The narrative of Belarus-Ukraine relationship, which should be centered on pragmatic cooperation, and we find lots of areas for that. We find regional projects centered on border issues, on energy issues, on trade. But I think something which is emerging and something that experts should address at this point of history probably is the fact that both of our countries are situated in this part of the world, in Eastern Europe, and even given all the political differences and the priorities of foreign policy and security policies, we still find ourselves between the two geopolitical blocs. And whether we like it or not, whatever choices we make, it also makes us similar in many ways. And I think that this could and should be part of our own bilateral Belarus-Ukraine narrative. This will help us to understand each other better, to understand what political scientists usually call the structure and agency of international relations, because I think the structure has been and still is under-addressed. We usually talk about concrete actions by politicians and not really take into account the structural restrictions that both of our countries face. And also it will help us to root the understanding of these priorities and interests in societies. And for that, of course, we need to involve as many stakeholders and groups of interest among the two societies as possible, beginning from the government, which, as I already said, is already on quite a good and pragmatic footing, but also the expert community and also all the traditional suspects, the regular suspects in civil societies that we'll like to talk about. Now a couple of words about security interdependence. I think this is something which has struck both of our countries in recent years, because before, again, we used to talk about some geopolitical things in very abstract ways. We used to talk about trade and economy, but the recent years, and especially the situation in the Donbass and the Belarusian position on the Ukraine-Russia conflict, had demonstrated that we are mutually interdependent in terms of security. To put it very simple, Olena said that Ukraine needs Belarus to be neutral and to keep demonstrating its neutral standing on the conflict. But in a similar vein, Belarus needs Ukraine to help us remain neutral, because it is only if we manage to keep the situation within these limits, not going to some extremes, and the conflicts, if we manage to keep the conflict from growing, that Belarus, given all its bilateral obligations in the relation with Russia, can remain this neutral ground. And this has implications, of course, for the discussions that we have in both of our countries. I hear a lot from Ukrainian experts that the Minsk agreements are not working and the Minsk platform is not working, which is, of course, true. There are obvious problems with the Minsk agreements and the trilateral contact group. But I think that here, to understand the structural limitation that Belarus has, it is important to think not so much in the direction how to take the negotiation away from Minsk to Geneva or somewhere else, but rather how to improve, how to strengthen the negotiation format in Minsk, be it the United States that many people would say are needed for this negotiation, or some other counterparts. But it is crucially important for us in Minsk to get this help from Ukraine to strengthen our negotiation platform, which ultimately helps us to stay neutral on this conflict. And perhaps a few words on the last aspect, trade. This is all over the media all the time, and whenever we get another trade war, as we usually call them, you can read a lot of things, including some political implications of that. Many people would say that these are sort of instruments for political pressure. Well, I think when it comes to all these trade conflicts, it is simply about, I call it a post-Soviet understanding of how economy works, and sort of desire on the side of governments as well as of concrete companies, be them private or state-owned, to lobby for their interests and to try to sustain their monopolies in many ways. And of course, you can always be sure that this is going to happen over and over again. And therefore, the task for us on the expert level, and of course for the governments, is how to minimize this and how to make sure that we all understand that all these recurring trade conflicts and trade wars do not deliver a huge blow to the overall economic relationship. And from what all we know, we're now having an intensified process of negotiations about all these conflicts in the formats that existed before the conflict in eastern Ukraine and some new formats. So, of course, new efforts should be made on these platforms. But again, it's very important to keep this whole discussion and relationship away from spoiling the general atmosphere in the bilateral relationship, especially given the fact that now this trade discussion is going beyond just bilateral relations, since Ukraine, beginning on the 1st of January of this year, is having a free trade agreement and free trade zone with the European Union. And I should underline, and this is going to be the last thing I'm going to say, that Belarus, in contrast to, say, Russia, reads this quite differently. And you can see that from the statements by President Lukashenko and other top-level officials. They clearly say that we consider this as a sort of potential risk, but we also see lots of opportunities in that. And this is, I think, another way to strengthen our regional identity and regional cooperation, to make use of Belarus being part of the Eurasian Economic Union and Ukraine having this new, qualitatively new trade relationship with the EU, and to see how we can mutually reinforce our bilateral trade and relation, but also help this bigger discussion about the EU and the Eurasian Economic Union to somehow progress so that at least conflicts be avoided. Thank you.
Дуже дякую, Євгене, за
Thank you very much for good theses, good remarks, which send us to the general context, and I'm giving the floor to the extraordinary and plenipotentiary ambassador of Belarus to Ukraine, Mr. Village.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I really thank the Institute of International Policy for the organizing of this event, and I thank everyone who is here, who take part in this event. And this topic is very acute for us, and I would like to answer those questions and express the position of our country. So, firstly, we understand the processes that are on the way in Ukraine and Belarus, and we are united not only by Dnipro River and border. We have common culture, spirituality. We understand many things, and we have a long line of border. We are friends. We share good and bad moments, and people see some things in black and white, but we have position, our own attitude. So the highest body in our country is All Belarus Assembly, and it identifies economic and political situation and the development. And on the fourth convocation, the head of state said, Ukraine for us is not only a good neighbor, these are our brothers, and all the institutions of our state, they follow the lead of our president. And about the development of Belarus, whether it will be European country or it will stay in the Union, it was difficult for us to be independent. You know that there were some instances. We suffered during the Second World War a lot, and each fourth Belarusian citizen was killed, and there was a new problem, Chernobyl, and Chernobyl brought such grief, and we spent 30 yearly budgets for this, and our territories suffered a lot, and 55% of contaminated lands are in Belarus. And we heard expert assessment, but we went along the way that we believe is right for our country. Our country is socially oriented, and we increase the well-being of our population. And you can say everything you like, that you should. We have the only way. We want our country to be prosperous, and all those issues that were raised about the east of Ukraine, there was a clear assessment of our head of state. We will never have aggression from our side, and we won't allow any third party to assault. And in no federation, and Ukraine should be independent and a free country. And about Minsk, we are a platform. We do everything to minimize the consequences. We understand problems. We reinforce our economy. We create joint ventures. We cooperate, and we show that there are many benefits in cooperation among the states, and it raises economic well-being of our nation and well-being of each citizen of Ukraine and Belarus. And 10% of our export we send to Ukraine, and it allows to be the fourth country, first China, then Russia, Germany, and fourth place is Belarus. This the billion of money, and also the next is Poland. And we follow this line, and we want to find common ground, and we create joint enterprises to produce tractors, cars, and agricultural equipment. And today there is an expo that is represented by the Ministry of Agriculture. And I would like to stress that previously it is understandable that expert assessment is very much needed, but we should always we should follow some rules, and you will get the credit from the international bank and so on and so forth. No. You provide benefits to this to agriculture, and you didn't transfer the infrastructure to the councils, and the state ownership prevails both in industry and agriculture. But this is the decision of the country, and why? Someone should define this. And as to the customs union and the union of Russia and Belarus and the single economic union, we should not review international agreements today, and those actions were taken in this respect. We can raise some questions, but all these decisions, they are optimal, and they reflect the interests of the side and the sides of in the best way. And we have big interest and do everything to help bilateral relations, and we should cooperate and between our nations. Thank you very much. And I didn't mention this before, and no speaker has mentioned this. One of the elements that we can use, despite anything that we say about Belarus, the situation with and I have a colleague from the Institute of Philology. They try to create this center for study of Belarus language. They traveled to international language school to study Belarus language, and it was organized free of charge for those who teach Belarus language abroad. And there is no such an international school in Ukraine to learn Ukrainian language in order to provide training to those who teach Ukrainian language. So we can cooperate in this sphere. And now I give the floor to extraordinary plenipotentiary ambassador, former ambassador of the Belarus, and he was in office in 2010, 2011. We shouldn't forget about all our good relationship in the past. Dear friends, I will try to tell you in a simple way how Chancellor Kohl told me. You can keep silence, but you shouldn't tell false things, things that are not true. So I believe that the speech of the ambassador was emotional, and there are some facts that provide opportunity to say about many things, of course. But I think that we can have it in further discussions. So the first component that I would like to review is a geopolitical situation and the role of Ukraine and Belarus relationship. So there is multipolar directions in the face of Ukraine and Belarus, and there can be tension in the area, and conflicts can be stimulated. The conflicts that Ukraine has, I mean war with Russian Federation, because this is war, I believe. And this is a lesson for our neighbor, for Belarus Republic. And in this case, I would recommend the both sides to view the situation to the benefit of both sides in order not to repeat those things. Because things repeat itself, those things that happen in the Lithuanian kingdom, and you can see a chronology, names, and signed agreements, and you will see that there are many parallels, and these parallels will show up and will bring some ideas. So in modern conditions, I'm speaking about the second component of continental security, the role of communication technologies. It plays a dominant role. And in the second component, that is called the role of this relationship concerning continental security, I would bring this information field as a top priority. So statistics, figures, we heard that before, and the problem is not that there are opposite information environments. So if there is alternative and discussion from one side, the alternatives and discussions are absent from the other side, and there is an attitude. And from this, any actions and these actions, they are the fact of decisions taken by someone, but not the opinion of the society that can influence the leaders. And the problem of continental security, it is connected with the fact that we are in the process of approximation of two evident security systems. And there are many people in Ukraine who serve in Belarus, and they know the bases, the areas, and their purpose is the same. They were modernized and they are filled with different components. And this is a fact and a fragment of continental security. Then the problem of regional security. It is evident that history of development of these components show us, and the lessons of today show us, that this security component can be realized in a comprehensible way only under condition that the countries, the Baltic states, Belarus, Poland, and Ukraine, and maybe other nations that are the neighbors, they have the answer to the first question of their own security, collective security in this region, and the components of interaction of security components in Europe, and that what we call Eurasia economic space, or joint state of Republic of Belarus and Russian Federation, or customs union, because here we have many problems, including values, technological problems, and ending with the components of modern security components. And in this process, the problem of information field dominates. When being in Belarus and after the return from Belarus, I spoke with many representatives of Belarus, Baltic and Polish representatives. I spoke with Ukrainians, and I asked them, let's create a four-language portal that would work in this area. And this is only our hope, our plan, but I believe that these steps, they would give the opportunity to somehow remove those contradictions, those emotions, and to create better situation. So inter-state relationship. If you take a brochure, there are some photos of meetings and handshakes of Belarus and Ukrainian president. And if you look at their faces and their gestures, if you're a specialist, you would understand their relationship. They are different, they developed in separate ways, and in the cabinet there was a wall, and in the study there was a wall and there was a photo of Ukrainian president and the prime minister at their meeting with the president of Belarus. And when a person came to me, I just showed this pictures to them and asked about these photos, and they said everything changes fast and nothing changes in our country. So this is the emotion I can express it, in the presence of the person I respect a lot, because I know that there is a burden that he carries in these relationships. So this is the main core of this relationship. When a person worked a lot, and I know many interpersonal relationships and their dynamics, but this thing, especially its economic component, I would divide, and I would propose to you to divide it in two. So these first are official relationship and also some smuggling. And in this part, you don't understand what is more important, because my colleague and I, we saw the list of the goods and their trading. So, and you see that what hides behind these figures, and we have a lot of experience in order to objectively assess the situation. And that's why we have a lot to work on, and these things should be resolved. About interpersonal relationship. When I was in Belarus, the first thing I asked for was to give me manuals for schools on history. I am a former teacher of history and a person who understands what is contributed and what will be the consequences, the prospects of such education. And I read the pages of this history book, and I was really surprised by the content of this book. So you understand what I mean. The feeling was, that was my feeling, that I saw this. As a teacher, and I like to read, and I attended a bookstore, small bookstore, that was in the hall of the Academy of Sciences building in Belarus Republic, and I bought books from there. And there was a book, as for example, questions on history of Belarus. And when I read these things, these are modern books, and I was also really surprised. I understood clearly what plans and what ideological basis is and what to expect. And I compiled these components, and I understood that there is a complexity in this relationship, and the core idea of this, for example, the relationship of Ukrainian state to Zhizhnevsky and Belarus relationship to Zhizhnevsky, without bringing up the story. So this is the difference. The same difference is in the relationship among those who take part in war between Ukraine and Russia in Donbass, from one side and from another. The matter is, these things, the human component, human factor, that further will dictate those relationships. And taking account those components that I mentioned, geopolitical, global, continental, regional, state, and this human component, we should think based on this, how to resolve this very difficult complex of problems. And at the end, I want to say only one thing. Please draw your attention to the events in the north of Kazakhstan. And I would like to tell to Mr. Ambassador only one thing. Being in this union, it doesn't guarantee security. Moreover, it provokes this problem, but not in the west of Belarus and not in the south, but in the west and in the east. And I say about it that you should pay your attention to the events that is in the events of those oblasts. And I tried to draw attention of my colleagues from Kazakhstan that they should draw their attention to that region. But everyone thought that the systems, they will be able to keep situation. But being in this customs union, or as they call it, Eurasian Economic Union, it doesn't guarantee security. It stimulates the conflict. And if you want to see this, you can look up all these components, but not in Belarus and Ukraine relationship, but in the eastern direction, and you will find answers. And these answers, I believe, they present lessons, and we should learn them and find proper answers to those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Besmertny, for the outlined issues, and I would like to add one more. In this context, Ukraine should also think of establishing some center of Belarusian studies, because we need experts who will analyze and trace everything, all developments in the Republic of Belarus, because it also concerns our security. We have very few experts on Belarusian relations and Belarusian studies. When I worked on my section of the note, I found this. I would like to give the word to Mr. Skriba, who also knows the text of our note, and after that we will open wider discussion, the questions and answers session, because we will be short of time, because at 12:30 the next briefing will take.
It's a very big honor to be here. It's always difficult to say something in the very end, as well as actually in the very beginning, because if you speak in the beginning, you have to push the discussion. If you are in the end, then you have to offer some sort of conclusion. For me, it is even more difficult because I speak after two ambassadors. So I hope to be at the same level as they did. So let me try. Firstly, I have to agree that despite many common ideas, many common interests, Belarusians and Ukrainians still have or already have a lot of differences. I won't develop this idea further. I think that this is a topic for our further discussions, further researches. But when I was a PhD student, I was taught that if you have any difficulties and if you have any limits, it is not a reason to stress your attention on these limits. It has to be something that encourages you to look for solutions, to look for some common points, to look for something that you can discuss, to look for a dialogue. Within this paper, which I actually very glad to see, because if I'm not mistaken, this is one of the first public papers on the topic of Belarus-Ukraine relations for a long time, and I hope it can be a starting point for further cooperation between Ukrainian and Belarusian, Ukrainians and Belarusians at different levels. Within this paper, I see two main tracks. The first one is a track of Belarus-Ukraine relations. Here, I think that the most important thing here is to develop a dialogue between two nations in a broad sense. If you read this paper, you can find the idea to offer to give the Ukrainian TV channels the opportunity to broadcast in Belarus. But actually the idea of Mr. Besmertny is even better. I really like it. Maybe if we try to start to create such a channel, the common Belarus-Ukraine channel, it will help both people of both countries to better understand each other. Because Belarusians and Ukrainians are the two nations that have absolutely no problems in relations with each other. I think that what two nations do really have is lack of knowledge about each other, partly due to the media propaganda, partly because there is really lack of sources of information for majority of people who maybe are not so active to look through the internet, and they are usually satisfied with watching TV. And within this track, I think that many Belarusian and Ukrainian research centers, NGOs, and even groups of activists can play a very big role in telling each other about our countries, about our nations, about our interests, and to have a discussion, to have a dialogue, and to look for something common in our countries. The second track is Belarus and Ukraine relations of the two states that are situated between the European Union and Russia. From my point of view, in certain way, it is a mystery why the two countries that are situated in almost same regional conditions didn't have, and even actually didn't try to find a common agenda, to develop a common strategy, how they can answer external threats. I can agree that partly it is due to our internal environment, but again, it is a topic of another study. Coming back to our relations between the EU and Russia, I think that presence of Belarus in the Eurasian Economic Union and presence of Ukraine in association with the European Union, it is something that we will deal with for many years, maybe for decades. And we have to take it into account and not to look at this structure as a limit for our relations, but as to try to find opportunities inside this structure. I agree that it is difficult maybe to find these opportunities in the security sphere, but maybe the economic relations and trade relations is something that we can start with. I think that the question of bilateral trade between Belarus and Ukraine can be developed in certain ways. For example, Belarus can create conditions for common Belarus-Ukraine enterprises located in Belarus to enter the Russian market. The same conditions can offer Ukraine for common Belarus-Ukraine enterprises. So the main question is how to create these enterprises, in what spheres. And this is a question, of course, both to politicians of the two countries and business circles, but also to the research society, to the research centers that that actually I think have to become providers of the new ideas, of the new agenda for two countries. Maybe starting with this. And the last, but I think not the least important thing, is that starting to develop this common agenda in economic sphere or in security sphere, Belarus and Ukraine have to take into account the fears, the interests, and maybe a way of thinking of their neighbors. We have two neighbors on our both sides that currently have not good or even very difficult relations. I think that Belarus and Ukraine have to think, first of all, how to create in Eastern Europe an area for cooperation, but not for competition between two geopolitical blocs. Let us name them like this. Because we see that nowadays they compete harder and harder. If we bring something more to this competition, I think it won't give us something good, but even will offer us some new problems. What we can do and what can be our actual goal is to look for a model of relations in Eastern Europe with Belarus, with Ukraine, and with these different integration projects that can offer our neighbors and us a way of coexistence and prospects for cooperation. As for me, I don't have any concrete solutions right now. But I think that the goal of this paper was not to offer this concrete solution, but to push the discussion to show that we have a lot to discuss and we can discuss these issues. And I think that within this goal, this paper can be called a successful one. Thank you.
Дякую, Андрію. Дякую за цей теж наголос.
Thank you, Andriy. We have now the basis to cooperate on, and through economic platform, economic environment, we can come to the better model of security, of cooperation in security sphere. At this stage, we have identified all the key issues which we sought to underline. Now I am opening the discussion. First, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Tishkevich to add several remarks. We have not talked about those issues yet. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, maybe my Ukrainian is not very good. Due to the restriction of time, I will base my speech on the previous speaker's thesis. In Ukrainian and Belarusian relations, it's better for us to think about future, but not about the past. This is very big difference because many people are saying that Ukraine has been reforming. When talking about Belarus, they say that Belarus seems also to be reforming or not to be reforming. There is a document program of government activities for 2016-2020. There are several theses in it that Belarus has provides state support to agriculture. On the other hand, it's saying that agricultural enterprises, big portion of them will undergo the procedure of bankruptcy and will be sold to foreign investors. When thinking about the opportunities, this is a good opportunity for Ukrainian, Belarusian joint ventures, establishing them. The second is trade. We are trading in those sins which we inherited from the Soviet Union, talking about the complexity about economies from Harvard University, we can see on this map that Ukraine and Belarus are on the low positions and have not been developing in those ratings, have not been moving up the rating positions. But talking about commodity nomenclatures, assortment, Mr. Besmertny remarked about the Baltic Black Sea Cooperation Foundation. Ukraine and Belarusian economies, they complement each other, they do not compete. The third problem is, which Ukraine faces and which is also acute in Belarus, this is the population problem. Both countries have been depopulating in reality. That is why in Belarus to support indicators it needs migrational increment. Talking about Ukrainian-Belarusian relations, mass media usually amid the topic how Belarus has from 100 to 120 refugees from Ukraine. Unofficial data is talking about 180,000 refugees from Ukraine. So Belarus has already covered its needs in migrational increase. But people, they are also diplomats, they also conduct talks between each other, and when officials try to cover some information, there is such seen as public diplomacy between individuals. So Ukraine should build policy as to Belarus, because it doesn't have even an ambassador of Ukraine to Belarus. For example, when the Pope came to Belarus, Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs can do something to facilitate this movement of Ukrainian believers to such meeting. Ukrainians now are more focused on forming the system of government, of governance, which should bring Ukraine changes in the economic sector, while Belarus focuses on the systems of economic relationships, which may bring to some political changes, but political changes will be very cardinal in both countries. In fact, we have two different approaches to resolve the same problem from different angles, and this is also the space for cooperation, because Belarus is going to the economy of knowledge. Ukraine now unfortunately lags behind, but the sciences of both countries are also complementary. That is why I thought to demonstrate several slides, but I don't have the opportunity now. I will just transfer them to the organizers of this meeting. Let's discuss our future. Thank you very much for making our discussion wide and switching it to other topics. How many questions do we have? We have two questions. Let's get the questions. If you have questions to some certain speaker, just name such speaker.
Thank you, Alena Egretriansky. former ambassador. I have 40 years of experience. So I took part in one of the seminars these days that was carried out by the Slovakia specialists, and the representative of Slovakia said that we have a situation that we forgot Russian language, but we didn't learn English. So it's very pleasant that our Belarus colleagues speak English wonderfully, and they presented their views about the situation that exists in Belarus and the Ukraine relationship. This is a wonderful research. I want to thank the heads of the Institute of World Policy and the co-authors of this report. And wonderful recommendations were presented. And I learned this research today, and I would ask about the role of Ukrainian diplomacy in the development and the improvement of relationship between Ukraine and Belarus. And unfortunately, I came to a conclusion that this is minimal or even nil. And the absence of Ukrainian ambassador in Minsk for 2 years, this is not understandable how it would have happened, and it cannot be explained by anything. And the 10th recommendations say that we should not wait, but we should appoint this ambassador. And we believe that if we look at the site of Ukrainian embassy, we see that there are 7 first secretaries. And I ask the deputy of the minister, maybe there are too many of assistants. And he asks whether it is good or bad, and he says this is wrong. I say this is wrong. For example, if all the persons are captains or majors, people should be promoted. There should be prospects for their development in order to improve their professional skills. And I have a question to organizers and the heads of the institute. Will this report be presented to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to the minister, and maybe not to the president of Ukraine, but to Konstantin Petrovich Eliseyev, for example? Maybe you should make a note at 53rd page, and they should see this recommendation. The absence of Ukraine ambassador in Russia is understandable, but as Velichka said, that it is unacceptable that there is no ambassador in Belarus. 7 assistants won't replace the ambassador. And I think Roman Petrovich, as a former ambassador, he will agree with me that everything in the world, in the diplomacy, the whole thing depends on the first persons, on the top officials of the state. So, from the presentation of the notes, we know that they go to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we have representatives of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and this note will be sent there. And they will work on it. So we have one more question. Please ask. Good afternoon. Markov, I also am an ambassador, and I want to support my colleague, Igor Turiansky, about the role of Ukrainian diplomacy. I have a comment and a question. A comment, I believe, in the force of figures. And I want to present the figures from the World Bank report, and maybe these figures will reject those comments that were made here. As I remember, gross domestic product of Belarus, $17,812, and in Ukraine, 3,860. So my admirations to Belarus and its people that develop and continue the development, and that they have a sustainable and good situation in the economic sphere in their country. And the comment is about security issues you have mentioned. As I understand, as I remember yesterday, the President Lukashenko, he expressed his opinion on large-scale maneuvers of NATO that are close to the borders of Belarus. And this statement, it reminds the statement of the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs of Russia. And the words of Mr. Lavrov. At the same time, As you know, Ukraine take part in this training, Anaconda, in the framework of Trilateral Battalion. And this raises the issue that Belarus and Ukraine, they are squeezed between geopolitical opponents, and there was a question that they should be neutral. And how can we explain the situation, this confusion, because our position to NATO is different, it is opposite, and it was also confirmed by the president yesterday. And in Belarus, the position, the attitude toward NATO is different. No neutrality. So how can we deal with this problem of security? Thank you. Thank you very much for your comment. And I maybe will speak the first one. So one more time, we would like to stress that as of today, for us, it's very difficult to find the ways to understand each other and to cooperate in the security sphere. And it is understandable that speaking about neutrality of Minsk, that is desirable for us. It was stated by the ambassador. Minsk is the platform for negotiations, and we also see other contexts, and we see it from in this note. We should look at actions, not at words. The status of neutrality, we cannot fix it. It is we cannot fix the status of neutrality because there are agreements on cooperation in the technical and military sphere with Russian Federation, and of course from this we watch closely everything that happens. I mean training and the participation of Ukrainian servicemen in NATO training, and also trainings that are on the way into regional units of Russian and Belarus forces, and 2015. So this security sphere, it is not as we want it to be, but we wanted to outline that we have some conclusions. So we have some border cooperation, some economic and social cooperation, and also remarcation of borders. It will be for a long time. And what we see is that Ukrainian state border and the respective border of Belarus, they cooperate to control the situation at the state border. That's why. So not only security and geopolitical issues matter, but also we should look at the level of development to which we were called to by Igor. I would like to tell you that I've already said that on the 22nd and 23rd of June, there will be all Belarus assembly, and they will establish the main goals of development. At the expert level, all the propositions, they are analyzed, and we have such a peculiarity in our country that before decision is taken, we can advise, we can make proposals, but when the decision is taken, it becomes obligatory for everyone, whether they like it or not.
Необходимость его выполнения.
So the task should be completed. As to our attitude towards NATO, you know about our position. We have also agreements, and I don't want to analyze them today or negotiate them. They are signed. We have a union, and we have Russian and Belarus union, and we have states, and we have common military forces and anti-aircraft forces. And as the military forces of NATO are at the border of the whole state, our state, so we are a buffer. So they are in the territory of Poland. So we do not need those planes that go up and they are abroad. So we are a small country, but those agreements that were made, they will be undertaken and implemented, and I'm absolutely sure about it because I represent our country and I have all the ability to say this. And as it was said before here, that about our attitude, what is going on in the east of Ukraine, we have a law. The citizen of Belarus who is in another country, respectively, where he took the arm in his hands, he will be criminally punished. And of course, there are LPR, DPR, and these people, those people who fight there, they will be punished when they will come back. And I can tell you that our law enforcement bodies, they know information about these people and they adhere to the law. We carry out peaceful policy, we establish peaceful relationship, and if a person is responsible, so he should be personally responsible and he should be punished for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this question about security, and I want to thank Elena for a very good answer. Let me just add very briefly. Well, certainly you find very different discussions inside Belarus about this, and I think in recent years the discussions are growing, but there is also a growing understanding of something called interest, or the national interest. You know, today this very concept is outdated, many people would ridicule it, but I think in Belarus and in our countries it's high time we thought about the national interest, and that's what I observe in Minsk. And that is why I would add to what has been said before by Elena and Andrei. It's perhaps not only about looking for opportunities instead of focusing on the problems, but looking at the interest, even though the conditions in which we exist might dictate something else. And you know, the world is becoming more and more difficult in this part of Europe, and there are new challenges that obviously require new responses which cannot be black and white. And if we have some structural limitations, this is our membership of the Collective Security Trade Organization, other commitments, we need to look for additional creative, interesting, whatever word you might use, ways to guarantee our interests. And each interest is to stay sovereign, and to stay sovereign in our part of the world is to find, at least for Belarus, of course, for Ukraine this is a different discussion, but in Belarus this is a way to find this balance where on the one hand you make sure that you do not attract any aggressiveness from some parts of the world, but at the same time you also make sure that you can stay sort of neutral and develop cooperation with other parts in Ukraine, including that. Then neutrality. I mean, this is also very difficult and long discussion. I tend to participate in many academic conferences where this is discussed, and you know, on the one hand, if we use the word neutral, we want to look at the constitution and find something saying that the country is never going to be part of military alliances. But then if you look at the theory of international relations or the history of international relations, you find lots of examples of countries doing something which was called, for example, active neutrality in the case of Austria during the Napoleon Wars, and many other things. But this is another problem. I think this is a problem for Belarus. This is a sure problem, maybe for Ukraine as well. The academic thought needs to be a little bit more creative in order to look for new ways and new sort of theories how to combine these difficult realities and the national interest, which very clearly says what the country is going to do unless something extraordinary prevents it from doing it.
Дякую. Я думаю, що у нас є буквально одна секундочка взяти.
Thank you very much. We can answer one more question. We don't have questions, so thank you. Please, your final remarks, Mr. Besmertny. Mr. Dmitro, I think that the question which you raised, it could not be solved in bilateral relations. This is a part of the problem which can name regional, continental, and geopolitical perspective. This is about that all previously working systems they are now collapsed, and in the system which we have, we do not have resolution, do not have solution to this question. That is why looking at the political timing and all those platforms which should seek for solutions, they are intended for solutions. That is why they should develop dialogue. The world has many years for developing such solutions. If people read Kissinger, Mackhofer, Brzezinski, and adopted their knowledge as serious things, but not as just newspaper articles, and worked on that, then we can see that refugees flee from east to the west, and this band, it goes 1,000 kilometers to the west. It moves. So the Kers line, you can just look that 1,000 years ago in 1214, the line of Kers, it was 800 kilometers east. So at all the levels, we should start seeking for solutions, for responses, because this logic which I mentioned, it is usually not talked about.
I want to say that difference between GDP of Belarus and Ukraine per capita is not so huge. According to World Bank and International Monetary Fund information, Belarusian GDP per capita is about 17 or 18,000. Ukrainian is 8 or 9. So the difference is not so big. Secondly, about security. I want to react on the previous comment. I participated in the event. It was a round table where Henry Kissinger participated either. And one of his points regarding Ukrainian situation as well was that in Eastern Europe there is nothing more important than stability and security. Regional stability and regional security. And that is the goal that everyone has to bear in mind. I agree that in frames of Belarus-Ukraine relations, it's difficult to solve the issue that Belarus is an ally of Russia within a security organization, while Ukraine is looking forward to be closer to NATO. But let us look at this from a different point of view. Belarus is already a member of security bloc with Russia. Ukraine has close ties, close relations with NATO member states and wants to somehow integrate into this organization. Maybe this can be a goal for both our countries. Being in different organizations, trying to prevent their hard competition or even instability in their relations, instability in the region, like Belarus did it last year when refused placing Russian air base in Belarus. That was a step that describes Belarus as a stability provider. Maybe if Ukraine makes similar actions, for example, stays whether a NATO member or not, refuses putting some military bases of foreign countries on its territory, it will also improve regional stability. If we make this goal for both of us, then we can find a solution. So the question is, what goals should we choose?
Дуже дякую, Андрію, за заключні ремарки від вас. І
And now the final remarks. Thanks again to every panelist for their comments, for their thesis, and I would like to thank everyone for the interest to our topic, and I am glad that we can discuss Ukraine-Belarus relations and expert cooperation. Next week we will represent our next note about the relations between Ukraine and France. So thank you. That's the end of the briefing.
Дуже дякую вам. Ідеально по часу і в принципі ідеально. Дуже дякую. Дякую дуже.
Я сорі, що я...
Все гаразд, ви що.
Окей.